The stocks surge. Well, it's all about another bailout splurge. The leaders of France and Germany saying they are ready to pump more cash into troubled banks. And Belgium nationalizing one of its banks. And that has Wall Street cheering. It's got my first guest jeering. Congressman Ron Paul says forget the Occupy Wall Street protests. Wall Street itself is the one attacking the free market and capitalism by pushing for these bailouts. Congressman, welcome. They like the free money more than the free market.
Well, thank you. I think you're right. It's the same process over and over again these last 3 to 4 years. Everybody gets bailed out. It doesn't solve the problem because the excessive debt is what you have to get rid of, and you can't have growth until the debt is liquidated. Instead, we just keep transferring from one group to another. So if somebody in Europe bails out the banks because they hold Greek debt, it doesn't solve the problem. It just prolongs the agony, and maybe it gives you a day or two euphoria on Wall Street, but I can't see how this is a solution at all.
What is the solution, and why do governments all around the world, Europe today, it was the United States during the height of the financial crisis, it might be the United States again with the U.S. financials, why do they keep defaulting to the bailout?
Well, I think it took about 60, 70, 80 years of economic wrong-headed thinking that taught that you can't allow these defaults to occur because they call that deflation, and that would be very, very dangerous. But politicians and the central banks always want to inflate, and the market always wants to deflate, that is, get rid of the mistakes. They get to get rid of the excessive debt and the malinvestment. So there's a contest going on. Before the 1930s, they deferred to allowing the market to make these corrections, and they were usually severe and swift, and they got over them rather quickly. But now we have followed the pattern of what we did in the 30s and what Japan is in the process of doing. But I think it's a consequence of faulty thinking, and this whole idea. See, Keynesian teaches that if you're having trouble, it's only because the people aren't spending enough money. But can you imagine depending on the consumer spending more money to get us out of this mess when the consumers are in over their head and they might not have a job, they're losing their houses, and they might lose their job next week, and the solution is more spending. This is what the Paul Krugmans want to do. It cannot work. Speaking
of Paul Krugman, a Nobel Prize-winning economist, the Nobel Prize for Economics this time around, interestingly enough, went to two economists whose research showed that people aren't stupid. They understand, Congressman, that stimulus spending ultimately results in increased inflation and further indebted countries. Average, everyday people get this. Why doesn't Wall Street?
You'd wonder, but why not the politicians who are really in charge of the monetary policy and the spending policy? If you can't spend your way out of these problems, you can't inflate your way out of it, and the average person on the street has figured this out, I think the politicians are way behind the curve. And yet I think there's a lot catching up, and I think that's what the demonstrations are about. They're saying that they don't trust what government tells us because they don't even believe the statistics, because the statistics we get are usually fudged. Because when they say there's only a 2% price inflation, most people know it's a lot more than that. And you know, if you calculated unemployment the old-fashioned way, like they did in the Depression, it's over 20%. And you just can't fool the people like that and say, oh, it's okay, the inflation's not that bad, and just keep spending money, and we'll keep borrowing money, and everything's going to be okay. People have figured this out, that they don't trust the people saying those kind of things.
Congressman, we are looking at pictures of the Occupy Wall Street protesters. Is it a fair argument to suggest that Wall Street is at risk of doing more harm to capitalism with its bailout culture than these people protesting capitalism?
Oh, yeah. But it's probably a mixed bag, because some of those individuals that are demonstrating are against profits and companies. And I do a lot of criticism of Wall Street and the banks, but I think if people get rich because they are insider traders with the Federal Reserve System or getting contracts from the government, and then they get bailed out when they get into trouble, no wonder people get upset. But if you have a Steve Jobs that is very wealthy because he produced a good product and the people loved the product and he produced a lot of jobs, I think that's entirely different. So I'd like to help sort that out and not blame capitalism and not corporations. Corporatism, which means corporations benefiting by special privileges, to me that's an entirely different thing.
Congressman Ron Paul, many thanks for your time and your insights.